I would like to welcome to the mic of Inside Sports a guy who's no stranger to Inside Sports, but I know sometimes he wish he was a stranger, like this morning when I get him out of his bed this early. I would like to welcome the one and only Arnold Red Auerbach. Good morning, Red.
Good morning, Harold.
How you doing?
Pretty good. I'm up.
Well, Harold has been a crusader for the rights of black people all of his life. He has also been a crusader that has had a lot of friends, not only in the black community, but the white community in sports. He's always been outstanding, always an individual, always speaking his mind, always giving you a platform to express your views. And when I was incarcerated, he did everything he could to attack those that incarcerated me unfairly. And he's one of my friends. Over the years, we've done many things together. So Harold is truly a man that believes in his culture and his people, and will always be that way because nobody's ever been able to change him. So
this is the heavyweight champion of the world, George Foreman, for the best in sports and sports personalities. When I am in Washington, D.C., I check out my good friend Harold Bell and Inside Sports. Talking about a real champion, Harold Bell and Inside Sports.
For many fans of the sweet science of boxing, the head rat has long been Don King, a one-time numbers runner and street punk who served jail time for manslaughter. King has been called a ghetto Machiavelli, a high-stakes hustler, a celebrity promoter who has guided the careers, some say victimized, boxing stars from Muhammad Ali to Mike Tyson. And with us in Washington, Harold Bell, a pioneer in the field of sports talk radio and TV. Mr. Bell has known Don King for more than 20 years.
Hi, this is Don King for the undisputed champion of sports talk. You must turn to my man, Harold Bell, and the original Inside Sports. For the best in sports and sports personalities, Inside Sports and Harold Bell are knockout.
Hi, I'm Harold Bell, and this is the Legends of the Original Inside Sports, the talk show that set the standard for sports talk in America and around the world. In 1970, I coined the phrase Inside Sports on WOOK Radio in Washington, D.C. Every radio and television sports talk show format that you see and hear today is a copy of the original Inside Sports. Inside Sports was out of Compton long before Out of Compton. Inside Sports was outside the lines and real sports long before ESPN and HBO's Brian Gumbel. The show was unparalleled, unrecognized, uncompromised, and still unsung today. Today's show, we're going to travel back into black history and take a look at the provocative, compelling, and unique friendship between Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X. The book is titled Blood Brothers, the fatal relationship between these two great friends. Joining me on today's program is a brother who has been a frequent contributor down through the years. He is a pioneer in writing on the intersection of sport and society. His books include Revisiting the Slave Community, All the People, NEA's Legacy of Inclusion, and his Minority Presidents and Bad Nigga. The national impact of the first black heavyweight champion of the world, Jack Johnson. Most recently, he wrote the introduction to the reissued classic book by E.B. Henderson, The Negro in Sports. He has been a history professor at Howard University, University of Maryland, and was a visiting scholar at George Washington University. He is a historian emeritus of the National Education Association. I'm happy to welcome Dr. Al Tony Gilmore. Well, how you doing, Doc?
Harold, I'm doing well, and I'm just pleased to be on your program today, and really excited when you let me know that you were going to be talking to Randy Roberts, a person who goes a long way back with me, and you were going to be talking about his most recent book on Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
And I am just really pleased to be a part of this conversation about Ali and Muhammad Ali. And I do want to apologize up front. My copy of Randy's book, co-authored book, just arrived today, and I did not get a chance to read it. I hope that I will enjoy it as much as I I've enjoyed his other books that he's written on Jack Dempsey, Jack Johnson, and just so many other areas of American social history.
Okay,
You have with Randy-
Tony, hold that point right there. Let me bring Randy in, then you guys can go at it. My special guest is a distinguishing professor of history at Purdue University and the author of many books on sports, race, and pop culture, including Rising Tide, Bear Bryant, Joe Namath, Joe Louis, Hard Times Man, Papa Jack, Jack Johnson, in the era of White Hopes. He was a consultant for HBO's documentary, Joe Louis, American Hero. And then there was Betrayed, the Emmy Award-winning PBS documentary, Unforgivable Blackness, the rise and fall of Jack Johnson. And so without further ado, I would like to welcome Randy Roberts to Inside Sports. How you doing, Randy?
I am doing great. Harold, it is a wonderful privilege to talk to you and to be joined up with Al Tony Gilmore. I'd like to tell the people listening here that when I was a graduate student out in Nebraska, I heard Al Tony Gilmore, and I believe it was the spring of 1973, give a talk on Jack Johnson, and it set the place on fire. I've never heard anybody give a better talk than he gave on Jack Johnson. I mean, he was articulate, he was smart, and he confirmed in my mind that I wanted to write about the same sort of things. I was already writing a little bit about Jack Johnson and Jack Dempsey, but I'd like to thank Tony publicly for helping me in my career and kind of solidifying in my own mind what I wanted to write about, what I wanted to say, and how I wanted to say it. So thank you, Tony.
You're welcome. You've done it quite well.
Tony.
And I also want to thank Tony. He reviewed one of my books one time for the Washington Post and gave it a wonderful review. And there's nothing an author likes more than a wonderful review, because authors believe all the good reviews, and unfortunately they believe half the bad reviews too.
Mm-hmm.
Randy, your books consistently exceed expectation. As Harold has read your book on Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X. I'm interested in this topic, and I know that this is going to be a very good program, because when I remember when Muhammad Ali announced to the world that he was a member of the Nation of Islam, and I remember the impact that it had on African Americans across the country. I remember those who did not like the change from Cassius Clay, the Louisville Lip, to Muhammad Ali. And I remember that like it was yesterday. And when I read Manning Marable's wonderful biography of Malcolm X, I went straight to those sections that were dealing with the Muhammad Ali coalition that was really short-lived. And there was so much to be said about it that Marable just piqued my interest enough to say, wow, this is an interesting topic. So when I found out that you were going to be on the Maggie Linton show, and I found out through Harold Bell that you were going to be on his show, I mean, I'm just delighted and excited about that wonderful and interesting time period that I know you're going to share with us today.
Yeah, well, we came up, Tony. We were about the same age, and Muhammad Ali was our champion. In the 1920s, people had Jack Dempsey. In the 1930s and World War II, Joe Louis was their champion. And maybe in the 1950s, it could have been Rocky Marciano. But if you were alive and of a certain political persuasion in the 1960s and the 1970s, you kind of lived and died with Muhammad Ali. You cheered for him and you cried for him when he fell a little bit short. But he taught us so much about so many things. And Malcolm X, in his short life, certainly did the same thing. I mean, Malcolm X inspired many people. A few people were outraged, and he angered his share. And his position was he was going to stir up the pot a little bit and stir up some people, but he did it. And together, I really think that Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X were two of the great African American leaders of the 1950s, 1960s, and today. I put those two along with Martin Luther King as truly seminal figures.
Yeah, one of the things, Tony, I want to say that about Blood Brothers, the fatal friendship between Malcolm Ali and Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X is that, I met Muhammad Ali personally in 1967 on Howard University campus. And that era of the Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali had kind of passed me by. I never really got a chance to be educated or enlightened until this book came. How they were great friends, man, and how they end up being mortal enemies. And there was a section in the book, and that kind of, a lot of parts in the book really surprised me about the relationship, because I really was not aware of how Muhammad Ali had really sold out Malcolm X. That really it hit my heart, because I remember Ali and I in the Sheraton Park in 1978. They were honoring him as Athlete of the Year, and I was kind of his guide, and we were in the room together, and we got into the Malcolm X thing, and he said, "Man, that is one of my biggest mistakes ever. That was a bad mistake." And as we get ready to get into it, Veronica calls us from downstairs. She's ready to eat, and I never got back into that conversation about Malcolm X, but I could see the hurt in his eyes, in his face, man, when he came out and said that was one of his biggest mistakes. So this book, to me, Randy, opened up a lot of doors for me when it came to the relationship of Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X. Also, I didn't realize how much influence that Rudy had with his brother, man, how important Rudy was, man. Rudy was right there in the mix, and Rudy was the one that really paved the way for me to have all access to Muhammad Ali. So your book was really, man, fascinating and very, very, it was a fantastic read. Okay.
Well, thank you. And when Harold's talking about Rudy, he's talking about Rudy Clay, Rudolph Valentino Clay,
right,
Rahman Ali was his new name, and really it was Rahman that moved towards the Nation of Islam even before Muhammad Ali
That's
did.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so Rahman was instrumental. When Cassius, when he was still Cassius Clay, when he was an amateur before the Olympics, he listened to an album by Louis X, who is today Louis Farrakhan, of course. And Louis X's album was, what is it? Heaven is a white man's heaven is a black man's hell, I believe the title of that was. Mm-hmm. And they listened to that album over and over and over again, and it made sense to them. And when Cassius would be in Detroit or Chicago or Atlanta fighting in the amateur ranks, he would kind of gravitate towards the temple or towards the street corner where he could hear some of it. And when he was in New York, right before he went to the Olympics, he was in New York getting ready for the flight over to Rome for the 1960 Olympics. He went up into Harlem. They went up to Harlem, about 125th and Lenox, and they were going to go to Sugar Ray Robinson's saloon, Sugar Ray Robinson's restaurant that he had up there, and meet the great man, Sugar Ray Robinson. Cassius wanted to do this. And so they went up, and he heard Cassius, before Sugar Ray came, Cash was just sort of wandering around. He saw a street preacher up on a soapbox, and he was clearly a Muslim preacher and preaching against the white devil. And Cassius turned to his host, who was Dick Schaff, and said, "How can he say those things without being killed?" He was just shocked. In the Louisville that he was brought up, Cassius was brought up in, a black man didn't say those things in public.
Mm-hmm. Tony?
Yeah. I agree completely with Randy, and I'm going to be shortchanging probably the audience because much of what I will add probably is already added in Randy's book. Mm-hmm. But Rudy did move towards the Nation of Islam and its cosmos and its thinking before Cassius Clay did. But I think that their father's background and leaning towards Marcus Garvey in the earlier generation established a predisposition probably in the household when they were looking outside of what was called the quote-unquote southern box of race relations. So that may have also had a little something to do with it. Also, I don't think we can separate Muhammad Ali from those times of the late 1950s and the very early 1960s, when in fact he fought in Rome in the 60 Olympics. But this is the time when the Civil Rights Movement and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the sit-ins and Freedom Summers and all of this activity is generating something that was ultimately, Muhammad Ali was ahead of this curve.
Right.
All that, Tony,
all of us who live will understand what I'm saying now. If you want to understand the transition of Cassius Clay, from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali, you got to remember, between 1960 and 61 and 1967, an entire race of people transitioned from Negro to African American.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Yeah,
You give us a Randy?
I couldn't agree with Tony more. Let's talk a little bit about Cassius's father, Cassius Marcellus Clay Sr. He was a talented man. He was a painter. He painted signs in Louisville, but he also painted murals, and he had real talent. He was also a singer. He thought he had tremendous talent as a singer. I think he had a pretty nice voice, but I don't know if he had tremendous talent. But he thought his world was stunted by the black segregated world of West Louisville that he was brought up in. And he believed in black nationalism. He believed in Marcus Garvey. And mostly, he believed that you don't mix with white people because it's going to cause problems. Cassius was raised, remember, Cassius is about the same age as Emmett Till. So Cassius was vividly aware of what had happened to Emmett Till when he when he went down that fateful summer to Money, Mississippi, and ended up killed. And also, when Cassius was brought up, there was a black family that moved into a kind of a white neighborhood right off the edge of West Louisville, and their house, they were told to leave, and they didn't leave, and their house was firebombed. Okay, so and the father would talk about this. He would say, I heard interviews with the father that were privately recorded. And he said, every week, 2 or 3 things would happen, 4 or 5 things would happen. A lynching, he exaggerated how bad it was, but these were the stories that Cassius Clay grew up with. If you mess with white people, you're going to get hurt. Okay, so you combine these stories with this Marcus Garvey black nationalism, and you can see why the Nation of Islam was so attractive to Cassius Clay. His father had a certain mysticism about him, and so the theology of the Nation of Islam attracted him. And so, the ground was well prepared before he joined the Nation of Islam.
Well, one of the things, too, while we're on that, talking about the influence of white folks around Muhammad Ali, what about the Louisville group? I wonder how they were able to move in with Cassius' father, thinking the way that he was thinking. And his father had a lot of influence on him during those early years. And I remember finally, after they got in there, I read in your book that he wanted to make sure that everybody knew, Muhammad Ali, that I am the boss. These folks just give out the cash, Even Angelo Dundee, he said, I am the boss. He made it clear, perfectly clear, I am running things even at that young stage, Randy?
No question about it. He says that the man who made me is me. Okay, he says that the Louisville sponsoring group, which was an 11-man all-white group of mostly millionaires and wheelers and dealers and movers and shakers in Louisville, who took care of them very well. But he said, look, they handle my money, and my trainer, he's a trainer. Angelo Dundee, he takes care of the boxing business, and he has his role to play. But I'm the boss, okay? I'm in control of me. Now, I don't know if that was ever true. I'm not sure he really was in control of him. Certainly when he goes with the Nation of Islam, they exerted a lot of control over his career, over his life, over where his money went. So although Cassius liked to say, I am in charge with me, I'm not sure that was ever true. But at the Declaration of Independence, it was important. Al Tony just recalled when, after Cassius won the title, when he defeated Sonny Liston on the 25th of February 1964, the day after, on February 26th, day after the fight, he held a press conference, and he told the world, he said, look, I don't know, he shows up, and he's not brash. He's not Louisville the Lip anymore. He's quiet. He's subdued. He's dignified. He's dressed in a nice sport coat and a shirt. And the reporters are saying, what happened to the Louisville Lip? And he says that's over. That was just to go get a chance to fight for the title, and I'm the champion now. And he says to the reporters, he says, I don't have to be who you want me to be. I'm free to be who I want to be. If that's not a Declaration of Independence, I don't know what is. That's something new under the sun in the sports world.
Mm-hmm. Randy, let me probe you about this early union of Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali. And I know that you're going to have an answer, if not carved in stone, then certainly a perspective that we can lean heavily on. Because I don't know whether we can ever be for certain what really were the reasons why he moved the way he did, why Muhammad Ali said some things that he said. But here is my thinking, and let me know how your research panned this out. When Malcolm first met Muhammad Ali, I think Malcolm probably did the most tremendous manipulation of his entire career with a public personality. He understood the power and prestige of the heavyweight championship and what that meant. Muhammad Ali understood, Cassius Clay then, what it meant, perhaps from a different perspective than a Malcolm X. The Nation of Islam at that point in time not only did not seek Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay then, as a prize, quote-unquote, recruit, they really didn't promote or advocate or condone boxing as a profession. Now, on top of that, my question to you, Randy, is, was Muhammad Ali aware that when he connected with Malcolm X, the most popular of all black Muslims, more so than Elijah Muhammad, the leader of Mosque number 7 in New York, the most vibrant and largest of all the mosque chapters outside of Chicago, was he aware that Malcolm was under suspension? That's number one. And number two, I've always thought, and you'll have to let me know what your research panned out, when he got into the Nation of Islam, was he aware that this was like the mafia, like a one-way street, like the fruit of Islam was like the Gestapo of Nazi Germany, and they could invoke fear? So my question is, when Malcolm had to be split from the Nation of Islam, Ali had no choice but to take sides. But to what extent did fear factor into this? I am a man, I make my own decisions. How does that reconcile itself against the reality of the fruit of Islam?
Well, all of those questions are fabulous questions, and they're all questions I deal with in my book.
I know you would.
When they first meet in 1962 in June, and one of the people
was that in Detroit?
In Detroit, yes, was it the Olympic Stadium in Detroit, I think.
That's right.
And so one of the people I deal with, and we interviewed, my co-author and I, Johnny Smith. One of the people we dealt with is a guy by the name of Captain Sam, who was in Miami, and he was one of the heads of the local temple. And Cassius, it was after a fight, and Cassius was in Louisville. And Captain Sam called him up on the phone and said, hey, there's a big rally. It's going to be in Detroit. I'm going to drive up there from Miami. How about if I stop by and pick you and Rudy up, and we'll drive on up, and you can meet Malcolm X. And of course, everybody heard of Malcolm X. And Cassius says, okay, fine, that's great. And so Captain Sam picked them up. They drove up to Detroit, and before the rally, they went into a luncheonette right across from the auditorium, and Malcolm was sitting in the back, was facing the door like Malcolm always sat. Kind of like if there's trouble coming in that door, I want to see it coming in first. Colin was like a gunslinger in the West. And he sees this Cassius Clay coming on, and Cassius walks up to him, and of course he recognizes Malcolm. He sticks out his hand, he says, "Hello, I'm Cassius Clay." And Malcolm shakes his hand, but Malcolm at this time isn't really following boxing. He doesn't really know who he is, but he sees this guy as a strong, dynamic, vibrant character, and he becomes interested in him, and he starts to take an interest in boxing. And remember, Malcolm, even in his autobiography, Malcolm talks about it one time, he was so enamored with Joe Louis that he wanted to be a fighter. And he fought a fight, and it turned out very badly, and he realized that he wasn't a fighter, or at least he wasn't a boxer. He was a fighter in a very different way. But he understood the power of the heavyweight champion. A person that Al Tony, of course, knows and is very familiar with his work is Eldridge Cleaver. And Eldridge Cleaver one time wrote in Soul on Ice, I think it's something like, he said, the boxing ring is the two-fisted testing ground of masculinity in America, and the heavyweight champion, as a symbol, is the real Mr. America. I think I have that right, Tony. I'm not sure. But anyway...
I know you got it.
Anyway, he understood, Malcolm understood, the power that a heavyweight champion could come. Now, at that time in 1962, he hasn't been censored by the nation, but clearly there's problems. Clearly he's been getting all the press. He was the leading recruit for the people coming into the Nation of Islam. And there are members in the Nation of Islam that are saying, Elijah Muhammad, he's getting sick. He's getting weak. He may not be around that much. Who's going to take over the movement when Elijah Muhammad dies? And there are people that are afraid that Malcolm will, and there are people that want to control it themselves. So there's already a rift developing. Now he will be censored in December, early December of 1963, when he makes his famous comments about the assassination of John F. Kennedy. When somebody asked him, and he was told very specifically, as all Muslims were told by Elijah Muhammad, you will say nothing about this assassination. Elijah didn't want to cause more problems and get more heat on him. So he says, nobody says anything about the assassination. And at first Malcolm says, no, I don't want to talk about that. But he's pressed. And when Malcolm was pressed, he sometimes couldn't resist himself saying something because he would always have something to say. And he says, well, now that you asked me that question, to me it's a little like chickens coming home to roost, kind of America's violence being revisited upon America. And he says, as an old country boy, chicken coming home to roost isn't something that made me sad. It's something that makes me glad. And again, of course everybody knew what he was saying, and it was for that he was censored immediately by the Nation of Islam. It was a 6-month censorship.
Mm-hmm. One of the things, too, I want to go back what Tony had also asked about, how did Muhammad Ali take the suspension of Malcolm X from the nation? I think a whole lot of time from reading your book, he was in denial. He tried to ignore like it wasn't going on. And I think that was because of his closeness to Malcolm. He didn't want that happening. So that was one of the things that I think I saw where he was in denial all the way through the book about Malcolm just being separated from the nation. He didn't handle that well.
No, you're saying Cassius didn't handle it well.
That's right.
Cassius kept saying to Malcolm when they were down in Miami. Now, this is, remember, Kennedy is assassinated on the 22nd of February. Mm-hmm. Malcolm is suspended of 63. Malcolm is suspended in early December of 63. And then 2 months later, on February 25th, 64, is when he fights Sonny Liston.
Mm-hmm.
Malcolm goes down to Miami in January of 64 to be around Cassius in the training as he's preparing for Liston. So he's already suspended. He's not supposed to be doing anything in public, but he's in public all the time. He must have known that the break now was coming. Because, he's not supposed to be around reporters every time there's a picture of Cassius Clay. Malcolm has got his head in it. And Cassius keeps saying to Malcolm, Cassius doesn't really know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And he keeps saying to Malcolm, what's going on? Have you been admitted back in? Are you in good graces?
Right.
And Malcolm kept saying, well, some things are being worked on, and we don't know for sure. Malcolm knew for sure.
Mm-hmm.
He was trying to contact Elijah Muhammad. I know all of this. We know all this from the FBI sources that we looked at, because Malcolm, there were some FBI sources very close to Elijah Muhammad. So they're reporting exactly what's going on between Elijah and Malcolm.
Mm-hmm.
But Randy, your point about the suspension, I think, is an important one, and I have another question leaning on that. I think that, and I understand why the Honorable Elijah Muhammad would not want the Nation of Islam to become involved in American politics. This was a movement that had started in the 1930s, and it had become extremely powerful and well known to all African Americans. But outside of African American culture, the Nation of Islam was relatively unknown to white America. In the late 1950s, I believe, or very early 1960s, Mike Wallace produced a documentary, The Hate That Hate Produced. This was, I think, the first real exposure that a group this disciplined, this organized, could rent Madison Square Garden, sell it out, and have a cosmos and a philosophy that was so anti-everything that America stood for. Now, when Malcolm X comes in and recruits Muhammad Ali, I think that it was very clear that this was going to take the profile of the Nation of Islam to a completely different level.
Yeah. No, there's no question that documentary, or The Hate That Hate Produced, made Malcolm into kind of a household word.
Yes.
No question about that. And, and it created a certain amount of maybe jealousy within the nation. I mean, this is the guy who's the kind of the leader. And so that suspension was really important, as you say.
You guys, we're going to take a break right now, and we're going to come back with a second part 2 of the Blood Brothers with these two fantastic historians, Dr. Al Tony Gilmore, and our special guest, Randy Roberts from Purdue University. We're going to take a couple of minutes, and we'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. This is exciting. Okay.